Welcome to the 2018 National Adoption Month webinar, In Their Own Words, Lifting Up Youth Voices to Promote Permanency for Older Youth. Adopt US Kids and Child Welfare Information Gateway are happy to host this webinar on behalf of the Children's Bureau. My name is Alicia Groh, and I'm a consultant with Adopt US Kids. Along with my colleague Erin Bader from Child Welfare Information Gateway, I'll be facilitating our webinar today. We're really excited to have you all on this session and get to focus some time on this important topic. And we're excited to let you hear from several leaders in the field on youth engagement. So for our agenda today, we're going to go over the welcome and overview, a little bit about what to expect on this webinar. We want to make sure we highlight several topics. So we've got a packed agenda, but we think it'll be really good for you. We're going to be covering the value in youth engagement. Then we'll be going over some tips and specific key considerations for engaging youth and empowering youth voices. We're also then going to cover ways to include youth voices in their own recruitment. Then we'll go into a panel discussion. So we'll introduce you to our panelists and then have a discussion on ways to engage and support youth as part of being voices for permanency in a wide range of options. Then we're going to highlight some specific resources for this year's National Adoption Month initiative. And we will have time at the end for addressing questions from the audience. I want to direct you to your panel on the side of your webinar screen here to the questions box. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have for us throughout the webinar. We'll be collecting those and we'll respond to as many of the questions as we can at the end of the webinar. We are also recording this webinar and we'll make sure that the recording is available for all of you by later this month. We'll have it available on the National Adoption Month webinar and we'll send out that information to all of the attendees. We also have a brief set of evaluation questions that will appear on your screen at the end of the webinar. We really value evaluation feedback on all of our sessions, especially these webinars, so we can keep making sure that they're high quality and meeting the field's needs. So please fill out that evaluation survey at the end, and we'll be sure to use that feedback. Now I'd like to hand it over to June Dorn, the National Adoption Specialist at the Children's Bureau, to help get us started on this. June?
Thank you, Alicia. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone from the Children's Bureau to our 2018 National Adoption Month webinar. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and hope that the voices you hear on the webinar today will positively impact your efforts to involve youth voices in the important work that you do. Making youth an integral part of how we promote permanency is the key element in making the outcomes meaningful and powerful. I want to also thank all of the speakers, panelists that are on the webinar today. And I also wanted to just bring to your attention the date for our 2018 National Adoption Month event, which will be live here in DC in the Humphrey Building in the Great Hall on November 13th. We will begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time and go until noontime. And hopefully you've received a save the date about that, and there will be an invitation that will be coming out soon where you can register either to attend that in person, and we will also have information about a webcast. So if you're not able to be here, you will be able to view it online and through that webcast. So hope one way or the other that you will consider joining us for that event. And also want to bring to your attention that our 2018 National Adoption Recruitment Campaign will kick off with launching our new public service announcements on October 25th. So please also keep a lookout for that information through various media outlets. So thank you again. I hope this webinar will certainly be of use to you and assist in your daily work. And now I will turn it back to Alicia.
Great. Thanks, June. So to add to what June said and just build on that a little more, we wanted to highlight that for National Adoption Month this year, the initiative's theme is In Their Own Words, Lifting Up Youth Voices. And we're focusing on this theme because it really highlights the importance of elevating youth voices and perspectives throughout our child welfare work, and especially to promote permanency in many ways, including promoting permanency for themselves and for other children and youth in foster care. So for today's webinar, we're focusing specifically on multiple ways to engage youth and support them in promoting permanency along this continuum of options. We'll be hearing directly from a lot of people who are involved in this kind of work and who can share insights and lessons learned about ways to really do authentic youth engagement and lifting up their voices. We hope this webinar really sparks some ideas and thinking for you about ways that you can increase the way that you're engaging youth in your work and amplify their voices in our child welfare work. So we hope you'll be thinking throughout the webinar about things you could do or key takeaways from this session. Now, before we get into our specific presentations and discussions, we wanted to get a little bit of a sense of who we have in the room, so to speak. So we're going to do a couple of poll questions. This is another way for us to get to interact with you a bit, and we'll show you these results so you can get a sense of what your colleagues are doing around the field. So for this first poll question, let me launch this for you. This should appear on your screen. We're asking, does your agency involve older youth in their own recruitment efforts? So please select one of the following answers, either yes, no, or I don't know. We'll give you a moment here for people to respond, and then we'll show you the results. Thanks for those of you who've responded so far. We're seeing a good response. Give it about 10 more seconds to get your answers in, and then we'll close this poll. All right. So this is great to see that 72% of you are saying your agency does involve older youth in their recruitment efforts. So that's great to know that that's already happening. And we hope that some of the ideas that get shared on our webinar today will expand on the work you're doing, or if your agency isn't doing that work or you're not sure, maybe this will give you some ideas to take back and explore for additional things you could do. So now we have one other poll question for you at this point. Here we're wanting to think about other ways you may be including youth voices. So does your agency involve youth in any internal advisory groups? And we're using that term broadly, so it could be review panels or other kind of committees within the organization or the agency. So here again, we're asking for an answer of yes, no, or not sure. I'll give you a moment here to respond. Give it just a few more seconds, and then I'll close this poll as well. So here we've got just over half of you saying that your agency does involve youth in some sort of internal advisory group. That's really great to hear. And I think for those of you who have that experience, you may have some questions specifically related to that work that you may want to submit throughout the webinar. So feel free to share questions or thoughts about that. And then for those of you who have said no or not sure, again, we hope this webinar may prompt some ideas for ways that you can think about expanding the way you're listening to youth voices in your agency's work. So now back to our presentation. So thank you very much for participating in those polls. We'll have a couple more poll questions a bit later in the webinar. But now I want to hand this over to my colleague, Erin, from Child Welfare Information Gateway. Erin?
Good afternoon. My name is Erin Bader, and I am the Adoption Program Manager with Child Welfare Information Gateway. And I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you all about the value in youth engagement. So as you've heard, this is the focus of our National Adoption Month of 2018. So why does this matter? Well, most importantly, as we all know, youth deserve the right to represent their own interests. Secondly, youth engagement provides a variety of benefits, not only for the young person, but the child welfare professionals, agencies, and systems as well. So let's start with the benefits engagement has for the young people involved. First of all, engagement offers critical benefits to a youth's brain development. As the brain is undergoing extensive remodeling, experiences play a critical role in how the brain matures. So this is that concept of use it or lose it. And so the more that youth are engaged, the stronger that their brain is maturing. It also provides an opportunity to practice adult skills such as decision making, presenting ideas, and advocacy. Youth engagement also combats feelings of powerlessness and isolation. Oftentimes in foster care, youth are left out when decisions about their life are made, and they feel powerless about what happens to them. Foster care can also be very isolating for young people, as they have often been disconnected from family or other friends, positive peer supports. And engagement can kind of reverse both of those things by providing them the opportunity to make decisions about what happens in their life, as well as form positive relationships with peers and adults so that they can have a say in what happens. These relationships also help youth increase their self-esteem and sense of connectedness, and provides them stronger communication skills, an increased sense of accountability, and helps them to acquire valuable leadership experience. Furthermore, youth that are engaged in positive relationships are less likely to engage in dangerous behaviors. Youth-adult partnerships are also critical to strengthening the child welfare system. Young people can encourage participation from their peers, and together the youth can more accurately represent the needs of young people. Youth provide expertise that can improve our policies and our practices, as youth have firsthand knowledge that is simply not available to adults. Youth expertise also can help ensure that programs are more relevant and effective, as well as responsive to youth needs. Youth bring fresh new ideas and an energy to improve the system. They, as we know, often are not afraid to challenge the status quo and tend to have a more social justice focus. Youth engagement can also lead to a more energized and committed workforce, as staff will feel more connected to the reasons why they maybe pursued this career in the first place. They're energized by the relationships with the young people, and they are more likely to see that they are having an impact on the day-to-day basis. Furthermore, young people help clarify and bring focus to the organization's mission. It helps us to see the why behind our organizations, which can in turn increase staff motivation and retention. Lastly, youth engagement can help to attract funders and improve organizational sustainability. I'm going to hand it back to Alicia.
Great. Thanks, Erin. I think that's a great framing for the discussions that we'll be having throughout the rest of this webinar. So thanks for providing that great overview. So let's do a couple of more poll questions for all of you so we can learn a little bit more about the work you're doing and that your colleagues can see a bit more about what's happening around the field. So for this next poll question, let me pull that up for you. We want to get a sense of whether your agency includes youth in speaking roles in terms of public presentations or recruitment events, orientations for prospective parents, or any foster, adoptive, and kinship family trainings. So please respond to this poll. And this is you can have multiple answers. So you could say yes to multiple options, all of them, or no. And we had to leave, I don't know, off just due to space constraints here. So you may not know whether your agency does this. So if you're not sure, then you can just not respond on this poll. We're seeing a lot of you responding already. That's great. We'll give this just a few more seconds, and then we'll show you the results. All right. So this is great to see that a lot of you are engaging youth in various roles as part of your recruitment and family preparation and development and support. So it looks like with the public events and recruitment events, that's where there's the biggest role so far for youth, but also at orientations and at parent trainings. And I would guess that you all are hearing the same kind of positive feedback that we often hear about the value of having youth speak at those parent trainings. I know we often hear that that's one of the great ways for prospective and current families to really learn more and hear things from new perspectives. So that's great. Then one more poll question for you. So for those of you who are engaging youth in some of those roles that you just identified on that previous poll, we're curious to see what kind of support and possible preparation you provide to youth to make that possible for them to participate. So we have some options here of ways that you may be supporting youth in having those roles. We realize there are a lot of other options for ways you may be providing support, but we're curious about these. So please let us know what kind of assistance you're doing to make that possible for youth to participate. And we'll show the results here in just a moment. All right, I'm going to close the poll here. So a lot of you are doing the coaching and preparation with youth ahead of time. That's great. And helping them think about what personal information to share. That's really a crucial step to make sure it's a safe approach and that people are thinking through kind of the boundaries and where it's appropriate to share what information. And a little over a third of you are doing some sort of stipends or payment. That's great to see that you're honoring that, the time that youth are investing that. And then having those staff involved to help redirect questions that may not be a good fit or may not be appropriate for youth to answer. That's another great form of support. So I think you'll hear some more throughout this webinar about these kinds of ideas as well as others for ways to really make this youth engagement successful. So thank you all for participating in those polls. Now I want to introduce Bob Hearn, National Project Director for Adopt US Kids. He's going to share some more concrete tips and key considerations for effective youth engagement. Bob, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. You know, prior to my job at Adopt US Kids, I ran a youth permanency organization for 15 years. Some of the key tips that we found to help to have successful engagement was to ensure sufficient preparation and support for the youth. So successful youth engagement really starts with developing a very close relationship with the youth. So for those of you who are in your organization, if you have that opportunity, it's really key to meet that youth where they're at in their environment to really get to know them. What we find with a lot of our youth is at the beginning, they might tell you what they think they want you to hear versus how they really feel or what they really need or what they really want. So spending that time with that youth is really critical to help them to be successful in their own advocacy, recruitment, time helping others out. If you're not that individual that has that opportunity to do that, then we find it really critical that you partner with someone who that youth trusts, who is in their environment, who can help you to learn in a safe and understanding environment what's most important for that youth. One of the key things that we find is that each youth is at their own developmental level, and it's really important to find out what that level is and where they are at currently and where they want to go. Sometimes it's really helpful to help a youth to really go back and understand their story and to help them to develop their story and to see what's happening at that moment. The other key piece is helping our youth to set boundaries for what they share. Some of the youth who have the greatest ability to publicly speak about what they want and what's happened to them and to advocate for themselves and for others also sometimes have the greatest difficulties with boundaries. What we found is in our history of doing this is showing youth YouTube videos of classic fails, of oversharing, and helping them to see that once that information is out there, they can't reclaim that information back. And so for them to really think about what is it that they would like to say that's in a safe and effective type of manner. That's helping youth to practice, helping them when they get inappropriate questions, helping them, that whole practice type of series, also helping them to understand about some things that they've done in their past where they thought about one thing, where now today they feel differently, helps them to understand that in the future they might feel differently than they do today about things. So your key point is do no harm and helping to keep our youth safe as they're telling their stories. Another key piece is that by telling their stories, and as we've heard often enough, these often create trauma triggering events. And we need to find ways to support our youth as they're going about telling their stories or advocating for something. It's important to help our youth to understand that although they think they are ready, sometimes someone will ask a question or something will happen in the midst of that. It could trigger a trauma moment, and helping them to prepare for that and to understand and how to safely deal with that in the moment is key to proper successful youth engagement. It's also great to look at multiple ways in order to engage youth and to help them to have a voice for permanency. So you're going to have those real extroverts that are going to want to go out and they're going to want to speak, and they have no problem speaking with adults, they have no problem speaking with youth in large or small groups. But there are also other ways to engage to help them to do that. So some of our youth, for example, we had a group that wanted to do a video on LGBT youth, and they felt much more comfortable doing that as a video and using that video as their way to getting their voice out. Other youth are amazing writers, poetry, and others are really great behind the scenes. And so helping a youth to understand what is the best way for them to be part of their own recruitment or to assist in helping others is a great way, and not looking just towards who is that public speaker and only using that public speaker. And so make sure to offer your youth and give them a host of options about how they can be present and be able to speak in their own voice. And then it's really key to truly listen and honor our youth as they're talking and have authentic engagement, not just you're great or give a standing ovation every time a youth talks, but really spending that time with them, building that relationship with them. It's key. We always found after a youth had participated in a panel or had done any type of engagement that our staff would spend time with them afterwards, usually with pizza. Just engaging them and talking them through it and being there and being supportive. If you haven't yet started a youth speak out or a youth specific recruitment plan, it's really key to have an agency infrastructure in place. And what we recommend is including your leadership in that plan, and when at all possible, including a youth. If you are not a mental health professional, having access to a mental health professional and setting this up is also important. And it's really key to remember that this is not a one-time initiative, but how are you going to sustain and continue to support youth in this process? It's really key to be honest to feedback and perspectives from the youth, and one of the most difficult things is not to be defensive. And what we have found to be the most successful is that as youth developmentally are differentiating themselves, they like to spend a lot of time together. And one of the greatest supports that youth can have is to be surrounded by other youth who are doing similar things and are similar circumstances. In my previous agency's experience, the Youth Speak Out team and having youth come together to support each other has been the greatest success that we've had in terms of allowing youth to speak in their own voice. The Youth Speak Out team is really important because it allows youth to empower each other. It allows them to come together to have a larger voice. It allows youth to take different roles, to be participatory, and to feel that they're part of being successful and making change to a system or to their own lives or helping those others. It also gives an opportunity for youth to learn from each other, to self-regulate, and to be a support. So I wish you all the best of luck. I think there's an amazing resource here. The one thing for those of you who have not started doing youth in their allowing to speak in their own voices, or a youth speak out team, or youth specific recruitment, is to go around the country and see what everyone else is doing. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There are people doing amazing work. These panelists are amazing. And what I love about the youth permanency field is just the openness people have with sharing their experiences, their tools, and their resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob, for sharing those very important principles for youth engagement. I would now like to introduce Nick Baumgartner, who will talk about his youth engagement work using youth voices in their own recruitment. Nick?
Thanks. So yes, my name is Nick Baumgartner. I am the Youth Engagement Specialist here at Northwest Adoption Exchange, which is located in Washington State. And Northwest Adoption Exchange, just to give you a little background context, we help provide adoption recruitment services for youth and foster care here in the Northwest. And today I'm just going to share a little bit about our focus on teenagers and older youth engagement, getting them involved in those recruitment efforts, which is where my role is really concentrated, primarily in Washington State. So at Northwest Adoption Exchange, we've created this specific program to involve older youth, teenagers in their own adoption recruitment and get their voice front and center for families to really hear directly from them. And we've kind of dubbed this project, we call them InDepth Profiles. We kind of started with a baseline of sort of online photo listing, and maybe a lot of us are familiar with that, and really thinking how to enhance and augment and go beyond maybe some basic online principles right there. This is a project we've been able to create through a great partnership with the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And really kind of at their most simple form, and thank you for putting the link up. In-depth profiles are creative storytelling projects that are published in live on that link that's up on the slide right now. And these profiles that we host are filled with creative ways that youth want to express themselves and represent themselves in their own adoption recruitment. These pages are filled with videos and podcasts and great photos and writing and artwork. And youth are the primary contributors and creators of this content. These in-depth profiles they're kind of the culmination of multiple one-on-one visits that I get to have with teenagers, setting them up through their social worker and current placements with teenagers who want to be more involved, have expressed an interest in being more involved in their adoption recruitment. So I'd encourage you, I just share a little bit more here about what this looks like, to click that link or go to it or save it and look at it later, so you can kind of see what this work looks like and not just take my word for it. But while I was here on the webinar today, I just wanted to share some principles and lessons really that we've gathered over the last almost 2 years doing this work, because it's been really successful. And I think the principles that we found in these in-depth profiles, in this deeper engagement with youth, really stretch across any type of youth engagement. And I'm just speaking to a recruitment context, but we've seen really high rates of placement for teens here in the state who participate in this project, of family engagement and creating more potential family options, and then also receiving a lot of positive youth feedback on their experiences doing this work. And so really, the guiding kind of principle that we follow with these in-depth profiles and collaborating with youth are these two questions that we pose up front and that I literally pose to teenagers who I work with, which are, what would you want to share with potential adoptive families, and how would you want to share it? What would you want to share with families, and how would you want to share it? And from there, the conversation and the project takes whatever form it's going to. It's really starting with a blank slate with youth and not trying to fit them into maybe practices or models that have sort of existed in the past around recruitment, but really wanting to get their opinions and ideas and creativity and utilize those. And kind of within those questions, really one of the other principles we really follow is that youth involvement and recruitment should always be framed as an opportunity, as a choice for youth to participate. This is not something that we expect for teenagers who are featured with Northwest Adoption Exchange for their recruitment. It really is about their decision to say, yes, I do want to be more involved. I do want to share a part of my story and be the sort of main contributor in how families would start to get to know me maybe. So it's their buy-in. I think this really creates a dynamic of working with youth rather than working at youth. That's a distinction I like to make a lot, that instead of showing up and asking youth to fall into our our practices or our models, how can we sort of be a sidekick with them and sort of always be giving them some of that decision-making power. So working with youth and not at youth is really key. Another principle that we really try to follow is it's kind of simple, but it's really just thinking outside the box when it comes to creativity. I mentioned these profiles, these in-depth profiles are filled with lots of different types of content, and that content looks like videos, it looks like podcasts, it looks like artwork, spoken word, music, photos. There's just so many ways that youth contribution and involvement can look like, and so we really try to make sure that we're meeting youth where they're at and allowing them to express themselves in a way that both interests them and fits them, and knowing that not every youth is going to approach this idea or this opportunity with the same desire to contribute or the way it's going to look. And when it comes to working alongside youth and sort of maybe helping them be decision makers and what they're going to share, we also really try to follow this principle of going deep and not wide when it comes to youth sharing and youth contributions and involvement. Up here we kind of joke around that in the Northwest, almost maybe, for instance, a ton of teenage guys might share, I like video games, I like pizza, and I like the Seahawks. That's great and all, and those are their interests, and we want to highlight those and lift those up. But we also want to dive a little deeper and try to help these kids discover what makes them tick, where they come alive in their lives, what they're passionate about and interested in and hopeful for in the future, and really go deep on some of those things. If it's their love of music, if it's their writing, if it's their passion for something around school or something and they're really working towards in their future, how can we highlight those and not just talk about them, but how can we show them in their element? And kind of going off that, we also really ensure that youth engagement is tailored to youth and where they're at, and the types of sharing is not going to be the same from youth to youth. One teenager might really want to dive deep and have this opportunity to speak directly to families, maybe through a video or a podcast. Others might just be more comfortable sharing, their love of basketball and talking about how they want to follow that passion as they get older. This is really a youth introduction to potential families, and we want to make sure that it's tailored to them in whatever way they desire. Just a couple more here before I kick it back to Aaron. A key part of our in-depth profile creation process, and I think a key aspect of any youth engagement process and recruitment, is always giving youth decision-making power whenever possible during this process. From the very start, really trying to give them as much of a blank slate as possible to be the decision makers and contributors when it comes to their own content. It can look like, meeting with them, on a second visit and saying, hey, what would you want to cut in or out of this video before publishing stuff? Making sure they see it and sign off on it and give a thumbs up and know where it's going to live and breathe. And for families to encounter that content, ensuring that those things aren't kept from youth and they're really up front is really an important part of that kind of empowerment piece and making sure that this work is a true collaboration. So those are some of the principles that I just wanted to share about this really exciting work that we're doing. Like I said, we're seeing it be really successful. Understanding that, recruitment looks different in different contexts across the country and with different ages. But, especially when it comes to teenage involvement, I think just some principles to begin thinking about if you're wanting to incorporate more youth engagement into your context, or do something a little different than what's been done. We always encourage people to start small, especially when it comes to maybe incorporating new types of creative content. Podcasts, for instance, are a really cool way for youth to express themselves, and can be really done with very simple tools like phones, or a small microphone, and involving adults that maybe they trust. And so that can be a one way to sort of jump in if some of these ideas, or the idea of making videos or other things with youth sound slightly intimidating. Is there are incremental steps, I think, to start incorporating these principles. And I would be remiss if I didn't add that I think a key factor in youth engagement work too, and that I found over and over, is just allowing time for youth to decide and sit with these ideas and sit with the opportunity to say yes. This is not lights, camera, action once you show up work. It really is a collaborative process that takes a phone call here and there, it takes another follow-up visit to ensure that again, this was work done with youth and not at youth. And then lastly, we always try to mention this, is this when we involve youth in recruitment activities and really try to turn the spotlight back on them and this control, give control back to them, it gets really fun really fast. This stuff it's fun to see youth come alive. It's so fun to see youth creativity in whatever way they choose to do it. It just looks 1,000 different ways. And so not only is it impactful, and we really see it working in the way we measure, family engagement and creating family options. It's really fun stuff, and I think it just really does transform this work when you give teenagers that leading voice. So that's all I have. Thanks for the opportunity to share on this stuff that we're so passionate about, and I'll give it back to Erin.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you sharing your words of wisdom and everything that you've learned with youth engagement. It's a real life example of what can come from a youth and adult partnership. I encourage everyone to take a look at some of those in-depth profiles. So building off of Nick's presentation, today's panel is going to focus on how to engage youth in order to promote permanency. So whether it is promoting permanency on their own behalf, like Nick just talked about, or in a more macro sense, our panelists today have extensive knowledge and information to share, and I'm excited to get started. So I will let each of our panelists introduce themselves and decide what they want to share with you about their background, and we will start with Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. This is Jennifer Rhodes. I am a former foster youth, and I aged out of the foster care system at 18. And was fortunate enough to go on to college, and I received my bachelor's in social work a couple of years ago, and have been working in the child welfare as a professional since.
Thank you. All right, we will go to Melissa next.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Melissa Otero. I am based in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I am the National Campaign Director for Adopt US Kids. And my background is around advertising, communications, and PR, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you. And Kim.
Hi, everybody. This is Kim Stevens. I live in Vermont, but I work for the North American Council on Adoptable Children, which is in St. Paul, Minnesota. So my personal experience as the adoptive mom of 4 young people out of the child welfare system in Massachusetts led me into advocacy a bit over 25 years ago. And in one of my first child welfare jobs, I was tasked with developing a youth speak out team, which we're pretty sure is the first of its kind in the nation, that included kids from all kinds of different experiences and without any kind of an application. If you wanted to be part of the team, you were part of the team. And they really guided our work in remarkable ways. They worked with us as co-trainers. They helped us develop our lifelong Family Connections for Adolescents program that was a youth permanency piece. And one of the things that they did that I just want folks to know about, and I'm happy to share through Adopt US Kids for anybody to use as a resource, is that a group of them developed an addendum to the home study process that was questions teenagers would like to ask of potential foster and adoptive parents so that they could get a better sense of who they were saying yes to. And I'm happy to pass that along in the future.
Thank you, Kim. And before we get started with the panel, I did want to just note that we had planned on having another young adult join us, but he was unavailable or became unavailable at the last minute. But luckily, our 3 panelists will have plenty to contribute today. So let's get started. I have some questions to ask to kind of get the discussion started that our panelists will respond to if you have something to contribute. So let's start with, as a starting point, what do you think is the most important for child welfare professionals to know about listening to youth voices? And anyone can start.
This is Jennifer. I'll go ahead and get this going. From my perspective as a youth in custody, I was in custody at 2 separate times, and so when I was younger, I would say I didn't really, wasn't really. I was very young. I was like 4, and so I wasn't really trying to be aware of what was being decided about my life around at that time. But then when I came back in as a teenager, I was 15 at that time, and was very much growing into be my own person. And I went through a lot of different caseworkers, like as soon as I came back into the system, and it was, just really frustrating. But what I think would be important for, anyone working with foster youth is to, make sure that you're being genuine and being real. And, I know that this is something that we all say, like, yeah, let's be real with them. But, like have an actual relationship. Like there are obviously like rules around like how close you can be, but, be genuine in those conversations and not so formal about everything. And, help us figure out like who we are, because we are, faced with so many challenges. And, growing up, those like years of your childhood, like you're not fully thinking through things, and you're, just, it's a beautiful time of development. I will sum it up like that. And, we just need to be listened to and encouraged to pursue whoever we are, even if we're not sure how to go about it on our own. So, just being real and human with us.
Hi, Erin. This is Kim. I'm going to add on to what Jennifer had to say. I think there's a couple of things that really come to mind for me. One is that really any young person coming into care already knows who they've been able to rely on in the past. And I really feel that if we were to ask young people as young as 5 or 6, who kept you safe when mom couldn't, or who were those special people in your life that you felt you could turn to, and then pursued those folks as a permanency option, we would probably avoid a lot of the transitions that kids have. As kids get older, they vote with their feet, meaning if they don't feel listened to, if they don't feel like their needs and desires are being genuinely considered, that's when you see a lot of kids run. And I think that honestly, as child welfare workers, I think our job is easier when we work in partnership with youth. And I think that we are offering youth an opportunity to be successful as they move into the world as adults, the more that they have those opportunities to voice their own feelings, to think about their own future and their own plan, and to not spend so much time trying to fight against the system that they feel hasn't listened to them.
Thanks, Kim. And this is Melissa, and I can add just one more thing to that. I think that one thing that I would share with child welfare professionals about listening to youth voices, just in the work that I've done on behalf of Adopt US Kids with youth specifically, and one thing that I've learned is how powerful youth voices can be, and that's in regards to sharing their stories, whether that's at an event or orientations, and also just learning about the youth themselves and what they're passionate about, and just the difference that a lot of the youth that I've worked with have made. A lot of them have worked in areas of advocacy, and so they've shared their stories or they've advocated on behalf of themselves to even, move legislation forward, and also to inspire other parents. And listening to some of the parents who have adopted from foster care, one of the things that they've said, well, I saw the video of X youth, or I met this youth at this event and they said this. And so just really trying to harness the power that some of the youth voices can have, I think is really important.
Thank you. Those were all great points, and I think I will just move right into the second question. What advice do you have for case managers or other child welfare professionals as to how best to engage with youth about their own case planning? Jennifer, would you like to start us off?
Yeah. So, I had many different, case managers, and I was in foster care for a long time, but I had some that were less involved and in their job, because this, of course, it was my life, but it's their job, and that's a barrier that you kind of have to meet in the middle on. It's like, so, make sure that I know that, or you're really invested, like, in what's going on in my life. Like, don't make like vague goals. Like, Jennifer will get a job. Like someone will take me to go and figure out what jobs have openings, or what opportunities might be around me, or Jennifer will visit colleges. Okay, like, let's have tangible goals to meet, because I know a lot of times when people are case planning, the paperwork's kind of the last thing that you're dealing with in the moment, because you're, so involved in the actual everyday life of it. And then something that my caseworker did, and I love her so much. She was my last and best person in my life, even still to this day. She never took offense, like when I would be upset about something that was going on with the system, or how I was being handled at school, or different ways like that. Like, she would always just be like, like, yeah, I get it. Like, it sucks, but what can we do about it, instead of just letting me ruminate and like what had me upset. So, just validating that I'm upset, or we're upset, and figuring out how to go from there. And then, I would also say, just validate whatever goals or whatever I'm trying to do in that moment. Like, validate our ideas, even if it's something that you might think is really obscure, or might not be something we should pursue. Like, just the developmental growth that we're experiencing by going towards something, and figuring out, like, if that's something that's good for us, or just what we're learning, even if it's not the best choice for us, is how we get our independence in the long run. So,
I had a quick follow-up question to that, Jennifer. So were there, and maybe there wasn't, but I'm curious to know what your case manager would do if there were maybe some goals that were court ordered, and you had a different idea of where things were going. How did you guys work through that?
Well, yes. So something that pops into my head immediately on that is, for foster youth, I think everyone's very aware that therapy and medication are pretty much placed on every youth in custody. And sometimes that is a necessity, and sometimes it's not. And in my case, at my age, it was, the psychological issues I may have been presenting back then was that normal for someone in my situation, or was I literally having like a mental breakdown? And so, I had to, kind of fight against that on my own. And when my case manager, my last one, when she became my case manager, she allowed me to kind of defend like why I didn't think I should have to take medication, and why I didn't want to go to therapy anymore. And, for every youth, that's not an avenue that they may want to take. But at my age, I was ready for that. I'd gone through therapy long enough, and and she validated that with me. And I had to sign a paper every month saying, I was, not going along with my plan, but I didn't receive any consequences for it. And in turn, that, taught me how to kind of stand up for myself.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you were saying about genuinely listening. So if we are authentic with wanting to engage youth, it's important to listen and kind of talk through what each of us thinks the goals or the case plan should be. Yeah. Kim, what advice do you have?
Well, I can't underscore Jennifer's advice enough. A couple of things that she said that really resonated with me were, number one, the idea of normalcy. What is normal teenage development, and how can we stop pathologizing the things that young people do that any young person in a traditional family would be doing, and we would be saying, oh, good, they're hitting their developmental milestones. So that's really key, to meet them where they are, to think about what they're doing and what they're asking in terms of what they would be doing, and asking if they didn't have to be in care, if they could just be in a family where they were living and without, bureaucracy and system involvement. The other pieces that I think are really key come before we even get to the point of youth permanency. I think that, for one thing, and I certainly know this from looking at my own kids' case records when I've had to find out different information on their behalf, our case records are not written with an eye towards positive anything. They're written about what was wrong and how did that impact that young person, and what needs do they bring to the table. But regardless of what needs or what challenges any young person has, they also have hit developmental milestones. Let's talk about, when did they start walking and talking, and when did they start questioning authority, and when did they start showing some individual initiative, and when did we see a personality emerging that we need to be aware of and responsive to. I think as well, if we talk about all of those important things, those positive things, we're also going to see a case file that becomes alive and rich with possible connections, possible permanency outlets. Who did Jennifer celebrate her 5th birthday with? And is that person a viable resource now? And how can we engage Jennifer in a conversation about that, and about all of the different people in her life that really tells us the story? The other thing that I hear from young people a lot is that they feel as though when they talk to a worker about something that's a concern of them, particularly if they're talking about an issue in a foster family or an issue in another kind of placement, they seem not to be believed. But for some reason, when they're talking about negatives in their life and they're not being believed, at the same time, when they say things like, well, I don't ever want to be adopted, or, I don't want you to look for a family for me, we believe that out of hand. And I think we should approach that same questioning about whether or not they actually want a family with the questioning that we have when they tell us about something that's a challenging issue that might make our job a little bit more difficult. And then finally, I really feel as though it's important when we're talking with young people about permanency, to, as much as we can, do that in the company of other youth where they may feel more safe, where they may bounce ideas off of one another, where they may even hear that, yes, it is possible for you to find a family at this old age of 16 or 17, and that you might actually be happy to have that family. So as much as we can include other youth in the work that we're doing, I think it really brings us far in trying to do the work we're trying to do.
Great, thank you. I think Jennifer and Kim both touched on the importance of relationships as we are working in this youth engagement realm, and helping them to kind of develop their own plan of where they want to go. And furthermore, like in how we empower them to consider permanency. So that leads to the next question. How can we empower and elevate youth voices to promote permanency? And I'll let whoever wants to start.
So I'll jump in. I have a couple of quick ideas, and one of them is around creating training with and for youth that helps them see themselves as having that possibility. When we were doing youth permanency in Massachusetts years ago, one of the things that we did as a first step was to bring young people together with their adult supporters, whether that was a potential lifelong connection or whether that was a caseworker that they felt comfortable and safe with. And we wanted them to answer a lot of different questions that could kind of tease out who are the people in your life that you would potentially feel connected to and feel like you might take that risk of saying, sure, I do want you for family, and realize before we even began the training that we were putting young people at an unfair advantage to ask them once again to kind of bare their souls for us, to serve our purposes. So the way that some of my youth partners helped me to develop this particular introductory training was that we had the youth who were hopefully going to join us in a permanency project interview their adult supporter with the same questions that they would then be interviewed with. So, for example, they would ask their adult supporter, you know, when you were 15, who was an adult that you felt safe with, and why did you feel safe with them? When you were 15 or 16, can you talk to us about where you celebrated holidays and what was important to you? What were some of your family traditions? And that very piece of empowering the youth to question the adults first, that sort of flipping the script for them, got them engaged and excited about having this kind of a conversation, and it leveled a playing field in ways that they did not ever feel that the playing field was leveled. We also worked with the adult supporters prior to this to say, we are going to allow the youth to ask you these questions. These are the questions they'll be asking you. And by the way, please don't, unload on the youth whatever emotional baggage you bring to the table. Try to think about all of these questions in a positive way and in a way that really helps them to start poking away at who could be in there for their life. And then we also asked our youth to envision themselves in a family. What does that family look like? What are the important components for that family? And then finally, one of the tools that I want to share with you is through another agency that I know that does youth permanency work. And they actually ask the youth to develop their own recruitment flyer and their own profile. Just sort of, who am I and what am I all about? But on two different levels. One almost like that sort of positive, here's a flyer about Johnny and this is the kind of family he's looking for, but also a deeper profile. And for young people that are not ready and don't want to consider permanency, the way that their worker goes about doing the work with them is to say, I won't share this with anybody until you give me permission to do so, but I'm going to get fired if I don't do it for each of the youth on my caseload. So building on the relationship they've already established, because this happens later on in the relationship, they're able to get the youth to start working on their permanency planning, working on their profile and on their recruitment flyer without that fear of what if it doesn't work. And the very act of engaging the young person in the work itself helps the young person to start considering the possibilities. What I've heard from my friends and colleagues that work in that program is that virtually every young person who has said no changes their mind and says maybe or yes at the end of that process of developing those two pieces.
That's great. And this is Melissa. And Kim, I'll just add, because we do have some formal training that we have here with Adopt US Kids, and we have worked with youth to help inform that training, which has just been wonderful. So every summer we bring in both youth and parents to formally train them for different opportunities that might come up for them, whether that's a national interview, a local interview with television, newspaper, something online, and we bring them in and we talk to them a little bit about the organization just to kind of get them familiar with that and really try to help them understand their role. Are they, and that would be really for any event that they would be doing, making sure that they're comfortable with that. Are we wanting them to just share their story? Is it for inspiration? Are we trying to get people to go to a website, or just providing, again, general education? And then really working with them around what the message development is and what parts of their story that they want to share. And then we do talk a lot about practice and preparation. I think that really just helps the youth feel very comfortable. And again, pulling out pieces that they're comfortable to share in whatever environment they might be in. Because obviously, speaking at a church or speaking at parent orientation is a lot different than something that might live online and be really national or can go viral, or something that's on television. So understanding those different audiences and roles and opportunities and getting them comfortable with what all of those might look like. And then really just, again, making sure that they're really prepared for what that might entail, and encouraging practice. We also do mock interviews. We put them in front of a camera to see what that feels like, and then also just talking one-on-one. We usually bring in like a former broadcaster, just because they have that perspective and usually can make the youth feel really comfortable as well. And just walking them through that process. And I think it is, and I think Bob touched on this a little bit, but it is really important to kind of help them shape their stories, and especially the younger they are, because again, something that they're comfortable sharing right now, for example, when they're in college or as a parent themselves, that's something that maybe they wouldn't want to share later on in life. And so really understanding what parts of their story they want to share, what's appropriate for the opportunity. And we use kind of a red light, yellow light, green light system to do that. And that was actually informed by a youth participant that we had at a training. And what that looks like is, red light information is stuff that needs to be kept private, confidential, either for legal reasons or otherwise. And yellow is information that falls into that okay zone. I'm comfortable sharing it here, here, and here, or with these certain people. And then green obviously would be any information that you feel comfortable sharing publicly, and helping them walk through that. And then also just helping them understand that it's okay to say no, and it's also okay to say I'm not comfortable answering that question. There's polite ways to do that, and we work with them on that. So if they get a question that is, something that they don't want to answer, we usually coach them to say, thank you so much for that question. That's information that I'm not comfortable sharing publicly. I'm sure you can understand. Or, just deflecting if they're asking a question that might require, if they said like, how many placements did you have? Or again, something that's just kind of a little negative, they can acknowledge the question, or maybe deflect it and just say like, this is what I would like to really focus on today, and that's my story, and here's what I'd like to share. And so just we call those bridging statements. and really helping them understand that, and that just because someone asks them a question doesn't mean that they have to answer everything that they're asked. So just wanted to add a little bit of information about some of the training that we do.
Thank you. Jennifer, I wanted to, it's kind of similar to the question number 4, but I wanted to ask you specifically about what you think or how you think youth could enhance recruitment and training of foster and adoptive parents. Some specific ideas that you have of what's important, whether they're helping to recruit for their own foster adoptive family or just in general knowing maybe some characteristics of what would make a successful foster adoptive parent.
Yeah, of course. I just also wanted to say I love hearing all the work that with the youth engagement and the different ideas and creativity that was just talked about. Like, I just love hearing that as a youth myself. So, but to go into the question, I think that it, is extremely important to have the youth involved in the recruitment and training process. And, how I would say this is, making sure that the environment's safe for this, but having like a good QA time for, foster children and foster parents, adoptive parents to come together, whether it be like kind of, some snacks around and just like not a very formal setting, and, just talking about like what issues like maybe a foster parent is facing or maybe a youth has faced, and just letting it be like very conversational. And then when you go into more of a formal training, my idea would be is and it's similar to what Kim was saying earlier about switching up the roles. Let's role play some real situations. I can think of a few in my mind that, like what if I missed curfew by 5 minutes and I received a groundment for that I wasn't allowed to do anything for a month. Is that fair coming from a youth perspective? And then, maybe my foster parent was like, well, that was the first time anything had ever happened and you just moved here, and this is a very like minimal like example, but having a conversation about why certain things are handled certain ways, and letting it be okay for the youth to express what they feel and the foster parent to express what they feel. Now, obviously, there's going to need to be some kind of a facilitator kind of making sure that no conversation gets out of hand, but just openness with the youth, because something that I really like to say is to child welfare workers, this is the job, but to the foster parents, adoptive parents, foster children and pre-adoptive children, this is our life. Like we don't come to work in the morning and go home in the evening. Like you're working on our life that we live every day, and so we don't get to go home from it. So if there are issues within a placement, if you talk to the youth and the family before things come up, like expectations in a home or activities in a home or what the youth likes to do or things like that, you could really minimize issues being blown out of proportion in the moment. And then I think that it would just be a great idea for youth to be involved like outside of a setting where the foster or adoptive parents are, and have their profiles be presented to the youth, whether it's a prospective home for that youth or other youth, and just having a multiple lens on what issue they might see that this potential family or adoptive placement has. Like, what are their rules like? What is their home like? What does this family do in their spare time? Is the schedule open, or, are the parents available if needed, outside of just evening hours? Or, there's just many questions that the youth could really make sure that parents are prepared, but children are also comfortable going into these homes, which ultimately is what we're all trying to get, is permanency for everyone, and not having a bunch of placements, which reduces the likelihood of permanency. So.
Thank you very much. I know that I could sit and listen to all three of you for much longer than the time we have today, but to wrap up our panel, I have one last question. What else would you want child welfare professionals to know about listening to youth voice? And I'll let each of you respond. So let's start with Melissa.
Woo, on the spot.
Sorry.
Again, I think I would just reiterate my first comment in that I really do feel like youth voices are so powerful, and a lot of that comes out of their ability to share their story and how they share it and the preparation behind that, and and also staying with them through the process. And so it's not just starting with the training, but then also, through whatever that speaking opportunity is or the engagement opportunity, and then following up afterwards, just that concept of not like one time and then it's over, but making sure that you're staying engaged with them and continuing to support them. And again, just really understanding that importance. We've seen some really great things come from the youth that we have involved in many different aspects and activities through Adopt U.S. Kids, and it's just been very exciting to see that continue to grow. So I'd really encourage other people to consider it.
Thank you, Melissa. Kim.
Hi, sorry, I had to unmute myself. I think the big thing for me is for workers to realize that every single child and youth on their caseload has a story to tell, and has a right to their story, and that story can really help inform their best work on behalf of that young person. Particularly, I think about those young people that are hard to be around, that are explosive or quote unquote acting out. Those are the young people that I always loved working with the most, because I felt as though they were really in touch with what wasn't working for them. And once they got their voice and once they felt heard about what wasn't working, it was amazing to see how that anger could melt away and hopefulness could stand in its place. And so I think not to really embrace, I guess, what Pat O'Brien from You Gotta Believe always said, which is that you have to look at all those strung together letters that could either read a family is nowhere or a family is now here. We have to believe as workers, we have to believe as advocates that there's a family out there for every single child and youth in care, and that family may not be a place where they will live all the time, but that they have every right and every possibility to have a family that will offer them lifelong support that is unconditional.
Thank you. Jennifer, did you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to, one thing, go off of what Melissa was saying. Making sure that going back and checking on youth after sharing, because as much as it's so valuable and, very effective for the audience to perceive, when a youth is present and sharing is, checking on us afterwards, making sure, transportation to the place and from the place is taken care of, because sometimes, that's an issue, and then making sure that the youth is just really taken care of as like if they were the keynote speaker, because they kind of are. But a few things that I would say for child welfare professionals to know is, make sure that you are like always validating the youth's opinion, even just trying to see things from our perspective, because we're constantly placed in environments where everyone wants us to bend and mold to them, and it feels very powerless. And we can all, I would think, come to a place where we have felt powerless in our lives, no matter if we're foster youth, a professional, or, we're all human. And, that's not a good place to be, and it doesn't make you feel good. And, it's so easy to just turn everything off for a second and just really listen to what this person is in front of you is saying to you, and helping them get to a better place. Because there's just so many things coming at us when we're in custody. And one big thing is never ever assume that or what is going on fully, or what we're thinking, or what we want, because we might not always speak up if you say something wrong, and or we may not reach the goal that we were trying to get to, because a lot of times, like I said, we're placed in other people's ideas for our lives. And just having an actual relationship with us, whether we're doing a speaking event for someone, or we're in our foster home setting or our school setting, like there's so much that we can learn from each other, and the system will just work a million times better if, like Kim has said multiple times, being equals and true partners.
Thank you. I thanks to Melissa, Kim, and Jennifer. I know that I have learned a lot from all three of you, so I really appreciate you taking the time to be part of today's panel. We are getting close to the end of our time together today, but Alicia and I wanted to take some time to quickly highlight some National Adoption Month resources, and then we will make sure to leave time for questions from our audience. So real quickly, let me just introduce you to the National Adoption Month 2018, our website. It is live, so feel free to take a look in your free time or when you have a moment. Some key things that I will point out just real quickly is that we have in those 6 boxes down at the bottom, we have a new how to adopt section. We had received feedback that visitors to our site some were looking for information of even how to get started, or how to make the decision of whether adoption is the right fit. So that's that how to adopt section. And then I would also draw your attention to the for professionals and the for youth page, where we have a lot of our resources catered to each of those audiences, with state and national examples of agencies that are walking the walk and truly living this value of youth engagement. So I will hand it over to Alicia to talk a little bit about Adopt US Kids.
Great, thanks so much, Erin. And just quickly, we wanted to highlight that in addition to the National Adoption Month website that Erin just gave a very quick preview of, we do have several great tools and resources for everyone working on recruiting and preparing and supporting foster and adoptive families on the Adopt US Kids website. And one thing that we wanted to highlight, since this focus is really trying to continue the emphasis on permanency for older youth, we do have our photo listing on the Adopt US Kids website that features more than 5,000 children and youth and approximately 2,500 families who are approved to adopt. And one of the tools, the sets of tools within that photo listing are our family finding tools, where you can search for approved families and you can search by criteria, including looking for families who are specifically interested in adopting older youth. So as we think about these older youth and really promoting permanency, we wanted to highlight that specific tool or set of tools to search for families. And you can use those family finding tools even for children who are not photo listed on the Adopt US Kids photo listing. So you can put in characteristics that you're looking to match and see where you can find families that might be a good match. So we just wanted to highlight that briefly. Of course, there are extensive other resources throughout the Adopt US Kids website to support your work. So now we've reached the point where we have time for some questions and we hope answers for the questions that our audience has submitted. Thank you all for submitting questions throughout the session. We've captured those questions and we'll get to several of them. We know we're running towards the end of time here, but we want to address a few of these. One question that came in was, how do you talk to youth when they worry about what their friends will see and seeing their profile out there in the public? So I think this is a great question, and thinking about what, that question of what information gets put out there and whether that's in a recruitment profile or maybe other materials that they put out. So I'm going to expand that question a bit, but I'm wondering if, Nick, if you have responses, or Bob, perhaps from Adopt US Kids, any thoughts on talking with youth about what information might get put out there in public and how to help youth feel safe with that?
Yeah, I can jump in really quick. This is Nick, and just highlight that, I think that question highlights such a key part of any engagement process when it comes to recruitment, is that transparency of where their sharing is going to be featured. I've literally had youth, ask me, will this be on Facebook? And we'll say, yeah, if you're comfortable with it, then yes. And literally, follow our Facebook page right there in the moment. But as far as, maybe some trepidation or some concern about, public content being seen, I think it goes to those conversations, especially around recruitment of, what type of content is being shared, and ensuring that what a youth desires to share is they're comfortable with that being seen publicly, and have an understanding of where that content lives and the purpose it's for. And it's been referenced, I think Bob referenced it, ensuring that the part of their story that they're sharing is appropriate for that content. And especially with recruitment, we talk about it a lot as an introduction, and that recruitment is not necessarily a place to share everything. And so, trying to, I think, work collaboratively with youth. And it's a conversation that recruitment folks can have, that their social workers should definitely be having, the whole team that's involved with permanency, around, if they're not comfortable with, certain parts of their story being shared, let's dial it back. Let's tailor it to where their comfort is.
Yeah, and I agree with what Nick said, and that was actually one of the questions that we would ask our youth is, if we do this, where will it appear, and what would your friends or other people think about seeing this, and what do you feel about them knowing this? And a lot of times when we would work through it, their friends already knew their circumstance, and their friends would actually go and talk to their friends. And a lot of times their friends would be like, we want to support it. We want you to have what we have. But it's really important not just to wait for the youth to raise this, but for you to raise this with the youth so they can make informed decisions about their own recruitment.
And this is Kim. The one thing I would also add to that is that with that model that one agency uses, engaging the youth in writing their own profile and their own recruitment flyer, that really helps them to feel much safer about what's going out there, because they're the ones that designed and crafted it.
Great. Thank you all. Another
Alicia,
question. Oh, yes.
This is June Dorn. I just wanted to add, and maybe Bob wanted to point out that on the AdoptUS website, there are also lots of information about writing children's narratives, what to include and not to include, and points about that, which can also help guide the conversation that professionals have with youth.
That's a great point, June. We have a whole guideline about how to write effective and safe profiles regarding children and youth. That's a great free resource on the AdoptUS Kids website.
Great. And Melissa, I think this is a question for you. Can you say a little bit more about what the program is that AdoptUS Kids does that does the training for youth and families to speak publicly? So talking a little bit more about our spokespeople.
Sure. So we offer online webinar trainings for all families and youth that are interested in being volunteer spokespeople for the Speakers Bureau that we have, that again is made up of both parents and youth. And so those we conduct kind of on an as-needed basis, depending on who we have coming in as new volunteers. And then again, once a year with the Children's Bureau, usually during the summer months, we bring in families and youth to do a larger in-person training where we walk through, a variety of information. Again, we talk a little bit about the organization, their role as a spokesperson. We spend some time getting to know them, doing some message development, questions, Q&As, storytelling. We do a full program on just interview tips in general. So a lot of always the very first question that we get is, what should I wear? If it's for example, a television interview or even kind of an in-person opportunity. So we go through a whole host of those types of tips and best practices around those. And then again, we do the mock interviews and give them the opportunity to appear on camera and sort of get comfortable with that. And just spend a lot of time really getting to know both the parents and the youth. I would say, and again, this was upon the direction from Children's Bureau, that one thing that was also really important as part of that training was to understand some of the backgrounds from the youth so that, again, we could really help them decide what information to share. Again, with that follow-up piece, we've had instances where our reporters have asked questions that are very sensitive. And so, again, that follow-up with the youth, are you okay? You did great with that question, or, that side of things. So as much as you can, again, I think Jennifer spoke to this as well, is to really develop that relationship that beforehand, that really helps in the overall training as you're working towards the message development and kind of what you're going to be showcasing as part of the story.
Great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And we have just a minute left here, so I'm going to need to wrap it up. Thank you for all of you who submitted questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but I hope we addressed many of them, at least through our panel discussions and through some of these questions. I want to thank everyone for attending this year's National Adoption Month webinar and for taking time out of your busy schedules to be part of this. As a reminder, we will have the recording of this webinar available online on the National Adoption Month website later this month. So we'll have that available for you to refer to and share with your colleagues. The PowerPoint presentation is also available in the handouts part of your webinar screen, in case you'd like to download that. As we wrap up, we'd love to just hear your thoughts. If you can just submit this through the questions window. Any key takeaways you're thinking of, for any aha moments or key thoughts that really struck you from this webinar? We'd just love to have that sense of what really hit home with you. And I want to thank all of our presenters and panel members for offering all of your great information and insights and sharing your thoughts and your voices with us today. I think we all really learned a lot. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we do have an evaluation survey that will appear on your screen as we close out the webinar. Please do take a moment or two to complete that so we can get that valuable feedback. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, thanks to you and